And one of the first things that I asked you when you walked into studio is, what would you like to see happen? I know it sounds like a very obvious question, but there's so much that is happening that we do need to unpack what it is.
Right. I think a good place to start is that we have a power crisis. And if we don't increase the electricity supply in the economy, we cannot grow the economy, and therefore there won't be any new job creation. So this is a situation that has to be remedied. Eskom's ability and the government's ability to increase the power supply is quite restricted. From a financial perspective, Eskom had needed a government guarantee in order to start its new build and execute its new build. If there's going to be further investment in the power generation field, the question is, where will those funds come from? Now, IPPs are ideally placed to bring in private investment in power generation. The obstacle to that, of course, is the regulatory environment has to be right for IPPs to operate in the power space.
One of the things that has baffled me for such a long, and maybe you'll be able to shed some light on it, is if this is something that the country needs, and that's very obvious. If this is, I mean, our government has constantly talks about how committed it is to creating jobs, and so this, again, we continue to hear about how this is hampering business, and so this continues to cascade into huger and huger problem. Why then not opening the market up so that we do have IPPs coming in and we do have the electricity that we need?
Well, in some senses, in many senses, the problem is almost perplexing. In 1998, the government produced an energy policy paper, the White Paper on Energy. If that policy had been implemented, we would have less problems than we have now for IPPs to operate. In 2007, the Department of Minerals and Energy produced an energy security plan for electricity. If that plan had been implemented, we would have had an environment in which the investment would have come. The question as to why it was not implemented is not for me to answer. It's the executive who has not implemented the government policy.
So now, so from what I'm hearing from you is we've had this legislation that has actually made it, what was supposed to make it conducive for players, the policy
yes,
for players like you to be able to be in the market.
Right.
But then from what I'm reading, and this is also coming from the Free Market Foundation,
yes,
that you're involved with, they're saying that proposed energy-related legislation is more restrictive than existing legislation. What does that mean?
Well, what it means is the Electricity Regulation Act, as it exists at the moment, allows independent power producers access to the market. It allows them to build private power plants. It allows them to supply electricity to customers. There is now before Parliament a second amendment to the Electricity Act, which now takes those, though it places restrictions on that happening. Yeah. So IPPs now have to go through a lot more hurdles and loops in order to invest in power plants.
So what are you doing as you know, you part of that whole body of IPPs? What are you doing to be able to get into that market?
Well, what we have to do, I mean, what you know so far is that the DOE together with the Treasury ran a program of renewable energy bids. So that was one form in which IPPs could operate into the market. But renewable energy is not the solution to our crisis at the moment. We need to increase the conventional power generation because we have a deficit of possibly 5,000 megawatts at this stage, but we will have further deficits going forward unless more investment is made. So what we need to do right now is we need to make sure that the amendments and the bills and the acts and the regulations being passed allow IPPs to invest in that space to make up the deficit as fast as possible.
So I want to give the example of Mr. Dangote in Nigeria, who's the richest man in Africa, and his operations from a manufacturing point of view. What he's done is he said, I'm not going to depend on an unreliable power source, and he's actually providing his own energy, and that's how his business is actually it's helping it to be so successful. Are you seeing business in South Africa going that route?
Well, certainly large companies like Exxaro, like Anglo, like Xstrata have made plans to build their own power plants to supply their own operations. However, the Second Amendment now being as a drafted bill and being put before Parliament places a restriction on that.
Why? Why? This is the part that I'm not understanding. Why?
Well, It
I
is,
suppose you're
it is
probably not
perplexing because what we have is we have a government policy that says that is what should happen. It should make it easier for IPPs to operate. But what is being proposed now is actually a subversion of that
I
policy.
suppose what I should be asking from your
Yes.
point of view, because you're not in their heads and you're probably not in some of the meetings that they're having where government is
Yes.
talking to themselves, but from your point of view,
Yes.
what does government have to gain in not opening the market, in putting all those restrictions and making it virtually impossible for the Exaros and others to make their own power plants, for IPPs to come into the game?
Shall I give you an analogy? The patient's had a heart attack. The patient's lying on the floor and writhing. And the captains at the top are talking about a long-term cholesterol reduction plan. The thing to do is to revive the patient and stabilize the patient. So we've got to make up the deficit in power as fast as possible and then worry about the long-term cholesterol reduction plan.
So are you saying, I just want to quickly ask you this, are you saying that government is not looking at now, that their concern right now is long-term?
We have a crisis. The lights are burning. The lights shouldn't be burning. We're short of power. Why are the lights burning? The lights are burning because that power is coming from somewhere else. So where's the power coming from? We're buying this power out of an economy. If we buy the power out of the economy, you're reducing the GDP, you're reducing the growth. You're reducing the prospects for jobs, for future in the economy. It is not a pleasant story.
What I really want to do, Doug, is I want to have people from NERSA and government, and we do have to have this discussion so that we can have both sides of the story and be able to speak to really what's going on and getting into the nitty-gritty. Thank you so much for coming, Doug.
Thank you.